On today's episode of Mile Higher, a very frustrating cold case, the disappearance of Amy Wroe Bechtel.
Hi, this is Steve Bechtel calling. I'm missing a person, and I was wondering if you maybe had an extra.
To have the thought process when you're dialing 911 to think, what would be funny to say right now?
Seems to me that they think that Steve is somehow involved.
We still believe there's that person out there, that one person that has that type of information.
So I think it's also possible that there's an unknown group of individuals out there.
If all of those killings really are connected to one person, it seems like they likely haven't been caught.
Wait a minute, if you guys are accusing me of something I didn't do, I'm gonna want to talk to legal counsel here.
I wouldn't let any client take a lie detector test. They're completely inaccurate.
I hate when families have to go through that and get that hope and think maybe this is it, maybe they're still alive.
Hey, what's up, everybody?
Welcome back to Mile Higher Podcast, episode 255. And today we are discussing a very frustrating cold case, a disappearance, the disappearance of Amy Wroe Bechtel.
Out of Lander, Wyoming. She disappeared in a national forest. And what's crazy about this one is there's absolutely no evidence, really, to suggest what happened to her. It's like she vanished off the face of the earth.
There are a few possibilities, but
yeah, that's really all we have. But it's one that is still an active case, although it is cold. So they are still looking for tips and things like that. And all it takes is somebody, maybe remembering something or someone coming forward with information to kind of send it into a new direction where hopefully it can be solved and we can find out what happened to Amy. She was 24 years old at the time when she disappeared.
Young.
Yeah.
Crazy.
But before we dive into that case, we do have some exciting news to announce. We have launched a new collection for Mile Higher merch.
Gosh, this has been a long time in the making.
It's hard work doing merch.
It really is.
I don't think people realize it's a lot, especially when you do it yourself like we do.
Yeah, when you're really hands-on in it and tweaking designs slowly over time. And we work with a bunch of different designers, so took a long time to get this collection together, but I am super proud of how it turned out. I think you guys are going to love it. So there is a new collection for all three of our Mile Higher Media shows. They have all launched today, June 7th. Limited quantities, guys. So head over to milehighermerch.com if you want to get your hands on some. And this time around for Mile Higher, we wanted to do a themed collection. And of course, we went with our favorite theme, which is space. So we have several options. These are all custom designs that we really worked hard to put in a lot of cool little details in there. First, we have our Cosmic Explorer long sleeve. That one has an astronaut holding a planet with a little Mile Higher podcast logo on his jetpack.
Sweet.
We also have the Far Out shirt, which I think this one is my personal favorite. I don't know, maybe tied with the next one, but I love this. This is an astronaut playing guitar in space.
You like to think it's me floating through space playing the guitar, don't you?
Yeah, kind of. You know what it reminds me of? That one movie where George Clooney goes off to space in the
Gravity?
end. Yeah.
Where he's just out there floating.
He's listening to
death.
music. He's not playing music, but that's the kind of vibe I get.
That's the inspo for it. The next item we have is the We Are Not Alone t-shirt. I really love this one because it's alien inspired, of course. And on the front, we've got the logo. And on the back, we've got this really cool illustration of a UFO abducting somebody. And there's a waterfall with an alien just kind of creeping there. Really, really cool. It's out in the middle of nature. And it says, "We are not alone."
Yes. And I think this one is actually my favorite. I'm going to take it back because the color scheme is just so cool. I love the font on it. And I love when we do a different variation of our logo on the front.
Like different colors.
Yes.
It's really cool.
I love the colors we picked for that one.
But my absolute favorite
of
this collection, because I came up with this concept, I'm going to take credit for it, okay, is the Infinite Campfire long sleeve. This is super cool because it's a little alien and a little astronaut hanging out on the moon or some planet somewhere telling ghost stories around the campfire, roasting marshmallows.
That's pretty good.
It's really cool. Yeah, this is by far my favorite one, I think.
Really fun. So if you guys want one, like we said, they're limited quantity, so go get your hands on them at milehighermerch.com.
But with that out of the way, let's go ahead and dive into the disappearance of Amy Wroe Bechtel.
So Amy Joy Rowe was born August 4th, 1972 in Santa Barbara, California to her parents Dwayne and Joanne Rowe. And Amy was actually the youngest of 4 kids. She had 2 older sisters, Jenny and Casey, and an older brother named Nels. She and her siblings all grew up in Jackson, Wyoming, and the Rowe siblings were always very, very close, really close. I mean, listening to interviews with them, they were some of the closest siblings. I mean, they
Very
were
tight-knit.
like best friends, all 4 of them, in each other's weddings. I mean, they considered themselves a team and they spent a lot of time together. Now, Amy was a very quiet but still profound girl. She wasn't shy, but when she spoke because she had something to say and she said it well. She was very goal-oriented, really smart, and a very bright young person. And when she got set on doing something, she did it. Basically, if she was given enough time, she could really do anything she put her mind to. She was a very determined type of person.
Amy was raised spending a lot of time outdoors. I mean, growing up in Wyoming, there's not a whole lot to do there. So a lot of people spend time out in the great outdoors. I mean, it's just absolutely beautiful in Wyoming. The scenery is stunning. So she grew up being very athletic. She started running cross country at the age of 13. But to be honest, she wasn't a standout cross country star at first. She usually placed below 5th during meets, but she still kept trying because she genuinely loved to run. Amy went on to study exercise physiology at the University of Wyoming in Laramie. And while she was there, Amy approached the cross country team coach to see, if she could try out and join the team as a walk-on, which if you don't know what a walk-on is, it's basically a college athlete who tries out for the team without having been recruited or having earned any sort of athletic scholarship. And surprisingly, Amy actually made the team, but she would usually lag a quarter mile behind the pack during long runs. And she didn't make the traveling squad for significant meets.
But Amy wasn't discouraged. She was a sweet girl who loved to run and always had a smile on her face and a good attitude. She kept coming back season after season. She just wasn't one to give up. And the coach didn't really mind that she would sort of fall behind. In December of 1991, though, she was at the University of Wyoming and she met a fellow student named Steve Bechtel. He was 3 years older than her, and the two started dating in fall of 1992 and lived together for 3 years. They also adopted a dog together, a yellow lab named Johns. But before Christmas break, Amy's junior year, the cross-country coach actually found her in tears, and she explained that she was working 3 jobs, and she just couldn't afford to run and do school at the same time. And the coach felt bad, so he offered her half a scholarship for the semester, but it would just be for a semester, and then he'd have to give it to someone faster that fall.
But I think that's what really motivated her to really turn the jets on, because that's when Amy really started to blow everyone away with her talent. She began running faster and faster, and she placed 7th at conference championships, which this secured her half scholarship for the next semester. By the end of her senior year, Amy was an all-star runner. She broke school records even and placed 2nd at the indoor championship. At the Tucson Marathon, she set her record time of 3 hours and 1 minute. In 1995, Amy graduated from college, and she and Steve moved to a house at 9 Lucky Lane in Lander, Wyoming, in January of 1996. The couple thought that Lander would be the perfect place to rock climb and run cross country. It had rugged terrain, and it was a small town with a population of around 7,000 people, which Lander was also known as sort of a climbing and outdoors hotspot. And Steve quickly became well known there for his climbing abilities. Even more well known was Todd Skinner, who was an elite climber. He and his wife, Amy Weisler, were the Bechtels' landlords and neighbors. Todd and Steve climbed together quite frequently.
So the house that the Bechtels were renting was a small, white, old miner's home, and it sat in a group of 12 similar houses that the locals nicknamed Climbers Row. So as an athletic couple, Amy and Steve would be in good company there. Amy was getting into climbing with Steve, and likewise, he was getting into running. The atmosphere was relaxed and a haven for climbing bums. It was the kind of community where people never locked their doors or even bothered to knock. So Amy and Steve later tied the knot in 1996, and it was Amy's philosophy that they could work when they were old and still have fun while they were young and could do all the things they loved. The two of them didn't mind working side jobs to pay the bills, and both Amy and Steve worked part-time at Wild Iris Mountain Sports, which is an outdoor equipment store in Lander. Amy also worked 2 other jobs, waiting tables at the Sweetwater Grill and teaching youth weightlifting classes at the Wind River Fitness Center.
Amy was looking forward to hopefully qualifying for the 2000 Olympic marathon trials. She had a minor case of shin splints, but it wasn't slowing her down, and she'd been running well. 2 days before she went missing, Amy was certified as a trainer. She had no issues with drugs, her mental health, and there was no infidelity in her marriage. Everything seemed good with the couple, and the Skinners said they had a stable, loving relationship. The couple was also very busy and excited to move. They had actually bought a house in Central Lander at 965 McDougal Drive 3 days before she went missing. She was getting a lot of work done setting up the electric phone line and other utilities. And at this point, Amy was 24 years old, and she had her whole life ahead of her. The new house was an exciting step into their future, but sadly, because of the events we're about to get into, Amy would never get to move in.
So that brings us to July 24th, 1997, which started out as a pretty normal day for the Bechtels. Sometime around 9:30 a.m., Amy told her husband that she was off to teach a class at the Wind River Fitness Center. And after she finished her shift, she was going to run some errands in town. And that's pretty much what she did. Her original plan was to drive up to her parents' place to pick up furniture in Powell, 185 miles north. But the night before, she called her mom and rescheduled. She said she had too many errands to run. Meanwhile, Steve also had the day off from Wild Iris, so he'd have breakfast, and then he had plans to scout out a climbing spot with a climbing partner. At 2:30 p.m., Amy made a stop at Camera Connection in downtown Lander, which is a photo store, and Amy was planning on entering some of her photos into the Sinks Canyon photo contest. She asked a staff member about the photos, and he noticed that Amy seemed like she was in a bit of a hurry, and she kept looking down at her watch while they were talking.
Also, it looked like she was dressed for a run, but she hadn't gone on it yet. She wasn't sweating, so it looked like she was about to take one. Amy was only in the store for about 15 minutes. She dropped off the photos to be matted and framed, and then left out the back door. Amy was training for a 10K hill climb sponsored by the fitness club she worked at. The 10K was scheduled for September 7th, and it would take place on Loop Road. This was a dirt road up in the Wind River Mountains near the Shoshone National Forest, about 45 minutes from her house. She'd been waiting years to do the climb, so she was really excited for it. Not only that, but the 10K was sort of a personal project of Amy's. She'd be creating flyers, measuring and marking the route, and planning the road closures. That morning, Amy hadn't told Steve that she'd be going for a run, but that wasn't unusual to him. They were both distracted and busy with the move and that day's schedule. And Amy was a runner, so Steve explained that, quote, "It would have been like telling me that she was going to brush her teeth that day."
So that day, Amy would only be taking a short run thanks to her shin splints, which is the absolute worst. I get those all the time. I don't run, but I walk.
And even walking, you get the shin
Yes.
splints.
Well, I walk on an incline.
Okay.
And it makes it hurt. Okay?
That's okay.
I'm trying. But anyway, she would mark the 10K trail from her car, driving slowly, using her car's odometer to measure the distance. She'd mark the trail, take a quick run, and then be back in time to meet Steve for dinner. The last mile of the Loop Road hill climb would be relatively flat, starting out around Fry Lake. Once Amy got to this point, she pulled over and likely set out on her run. So she was last seen by witnesses on the Loop Road between Sinks Canyon and South Pass. She was wearing a yellow tank top, black shorts, Adidas Trail Response running shoes, Timex Ironman triathlon watch, and a small double band wedding ring. Meanwhile, Steve had spent the day scouting out a climbing spot with his friend, Sam Leitner Jr., and Steve would also be bringing Johns, the yellow lab, to accompany him and Sam. The rock that they had been looking at was in Du Bois, so basically they were meeting in the middle. And Steve lived about 75 miles away in Lander, and Sam lived about 85 miles away in Jackson.
Steve and Sam had a history of being climbing partners. They'd gone climbing together all over the American West and parts of Asia even. In fact, a year prior to this, they'd gone to Australia to climb, and Amy accompanied them. But the trip was actually pretty rocky, and Steve and Sam weren't getting along. In fact, Sam said that he was getting along better with Amy than her husband, so Sam flew home early. But the two still trusted each other as climbing partners. That day, they'd be meeting in Du Bois and traveling north into the Cartridge Creek area of the Shoshone National Forest. The two men brought along guns and bear spray in order to protect themselves from the grizzly bears that live up there. But the climbing trip had been sort of a bust. The spot was hard to get to, and the rock wasn't the most ideal for climbing, so it wouldn't be worth the effort for them.
And with thunderstorms looming in the area, Steve and Sam decided to go back to Du Bois, separate, and then head home. So Steve returned home around 4:30 p.m. that day, but when he came back, he noticed the house was empty, and Amy wasn't there. But He didn't think too much of it at first. I mean, again, this couple loves to be outside, loves to run. So Steve just figured that Amy was out on a run and she would be back soon. And at 5 p.m., a couple was driving on Loop Road and spotted a blonde woman who was running towards Fry Lake. And they noticed that she was running unusually fast, almost as if she was trying to get away from something. They described the woman as wearing black shorts similar to the ones that Amy was seen in earlier that day, a light-colored tank top, and a fanny pack.
I know I'm not the only one when I say that our world has become all about subscriptions. Literally everything you buy, it seems like, has a subscription attached to it. I know for me personally, I have probably 10 plus subscriptions. If you just think about your streaming services, I have at least 6 to 8 subscriptions in just streaming alone, not to mention meal kits and all these car washes. I mean, it seems like everywhere you go, you're signing up for a subscription, and it's very easy to lose track of which ones you're subscribed to and still paying for and stay on top of it. And I am the worst when it comes to that. But luckily, I downloaded the Rocket Money app, got my account set up on there, and I was able to take a look at truly how much I'm spending on subscriptions. And it was hundreds and hundreds of dollars. I couldn't believe how much I was spending. The thing I hate about subscriptions is canceling them. Most companies make it very, very difficult to do it. You got to call, you got to email, you got to get on chat. They usually don't make it easy for you to just hit cancel. But with Rocket Money, they actually help you cancel those unwanted subscriptions, which makes your life so much easier. If you haven't heard of Rocket Money is a personal finance app that finds and cancels your unwanted subscriptions, monitors your spending, and helps you lower your bills all in one place. Over 80% of people have subscriptions they forgot about, and chances are you're one of them. So Rocket Money will quickly and easily find your subscriptions for you, show you what they are, and then you can just hit cancel, and Rocket Money will cancel it for you. It's that easy. Rocket Money also helps you manage all your finances in one place, automatically categorizes your expenses so you can easily track and budget in real time, and also get alerted if anything looks off. Over 3 million people, including myself, have used Rocket Money, saving the average person up to $720 a year. I'd say for me personally, it's far more than that. They can help you with bill and negotiation as well, which is really cool. You can monitor your credit score, there's autopilot savings, and even track your net worth, all in one single app. It's truly an app that you can't live without, honestly. So stop throwing your money away, cancel unwanted subscriptions, and manage your expenses the easy way by going to rocketmoney.com/milehigher. That's rocketmoney.com/milehigher. rocketmoney.com/milehigher. This couple is heading to the nearby Lewis Lake to meet 2 friends, and as they made their way back down around 7 p.m., they didn't see the blonde runner again. One of the witnesses turned from the passenger seat to talk to her guest in the back seat, and as she did, she caught a very short glimpse of a dirty white van parked beside the Burnt Gulch cutoff. It looked like there was something red in the back of the van, but that's basically all we have from those witnesses. At 6:45 p.m., Todd stopped and asked if Amy and Steve wanted to join some friends for dinner. They were going to grab some pizza. Steve declined and said he was going to wait for his wife Amy to get back. But Amy didn't make it home for dinner. Hours continued to go by and Amy still wasn't home. Finally, the sun went down over Lander and Steve really started to worry a little bit more. Amy wouldn't be on a run for this long out in the dark.
So Steve stopped by Todd Skinner's house around 8:15 to ask if he and his wife had seen Amy, but they hadn't. The couple would be going to a movie that night at 8:45, but they weren't too worried because they figured she'd be back by then. Steve started calling around to see if any friends and family had seen Amy, and nobody had. So he started driving around town, checking her usual running paths and wild iris, but more hours continued to pass with no signs of Amy. At 9 p.m., Steve called Amy's parents. He knew that she'd been thinking about driving up to see them, but they didn't know where she was either. Then he calls his parents and Amy's sister, but she's not with any of them. So when 10:30 p.m. rolls around and Amy still hadn't made it home, Steve decided to do something. He picked up the phone and called 911 to report Amy missing.
Which we have a very brief clip of the 911 call. So let's listen to that here real quick.
Hi, this is Steve Bechtel calling. I'm missing a person, and I was wondering if you maybe had an extra.
So that's all we have of that 911 call that we can play. But even just that brief 7 seconds is
What the fuck?
kind of bizarre to me, honestly. We have
Yeah.
a missing person,
I'm wondering if you have an extra.
a spare around any place. Like, that's just the most bizarre way to
So
handle
casual,
that.
like making a joke. Which, I mean, obviously it's hard to judge someone's 911 call, of course. I know people will say that to us, but don't you think that's pretty weird?
It's pretty weird because it's also 10:30 now.
Yeah.
So we're talking 5-ish hours
Mhm.
later than she should have been home. And you would think, I know for me personally, if you were out running in the forest somewhere and 5 hours had gone by, first of all, I wouldn't have waited 5 hours to start looking for you
Mm-mm.
or get the authorities involved. But I certainly wouldn't sound like that
Yeah.
or
I mean,
say the things that you just said.
by that point, you have to have some type of concern, even if you don't think something horrible has
Right.
happened.
Like foul play happened.
So
but
many
just,
other things could have happened.
Yeah.
She could be
Her
injured
car could be
somewhere.
broken.
She
She
could have
could have
been
hurt.
attacked by an animal.
Yeah.
I do have to say, I guess I kind of get it on some sense. He's thinking like, again, this is a really independent seeming couple.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
And maybe he's almost like sheepish as he's making that call, making a joke, because in his head, he's not thinking the worst.
Any of those
he's
things,
thinking
right.
she's out running errands. We're so busy. And, maybe she caught up talking to a friend or something. And this is so embarrassing because she's going to come back and
Mm-hmm.
I'm going to have reported her missing.
I see what you mean.
And I do find it odd. It kind of makes me think about what we were talking about with Murder with My Husband when Garrett was talking about calling the cops.
How long would it take for somebody to call the cops to come and find you?
He was talking about a recent thing where Peyton was having trouble breathing or something.
Yeah, and
Yeah.
the way he was talking to, yeah.
But she's right in front of him. I mean, that's such a different situation. I just think that when it's this late at night and you're talking, someone's missing in the wilderness.
It's definitely odd.
It's odd.
Yeah, I think at this point he didn't really know where she was, so he didn't know she was lost in the woods. But that's also weird because you don't know where she is. So
Right.
it is definitely odd, but I guess something to consider, maybe food for thought. But
Yeah. I mean, of course.
But you also have to remember he already called her family too. So it's like he calls them and they haven't seen her, they haven't heard from her. So I feel like that would maybe cause you more concern if they were like, yeah, we haven't seen her.
Yeah, no one has seen her. I
So
think it's
5 hours.
strange.
I mean, 5 hours is a long time. It's pretty late
I think
at that point.
If he was just being casual in the way he was reporting, it'd be one thing, but making the joke to have the thought process when you're dialing 911 to think, what would be funny to say right now?
yeah, you have to like think of that
Right?
joke. Like you had to, I don't know.
Wondering if you have a spare?
Yeah,
That's just
odd. Definitely odd.
really weird to me.
So naturally, the Skinners were also very worried and they actually went out looking for Amy on routes that they thought she would have run. Steve actually stayed home while they searched in order to wait for police and to be by the phone in case Amy called. For about an hour, the Skinners drove around Loop Road trying to find Amy, as they figured, she probably just gotten injured or ran out of gas somewhere and they were going to just find her stranded out there. And late that night around 1 a.m., they actually found Amy's white Toyota Tercel wagon abandoned. It had been left parked on the Burnt Gulch turnoff that splits onto Loop Road, which right there, I'm thinking, what about those people that saw that white van at almost the exact spot?
And looking back now later, that woman is like brought to tears when she thinks of this situation because she's like, I know it was her. Like it had to be her.
Yeah.
So
yeah. How many other, I'm sure there's other people that go running in this area, but there was nobody else that they mentioned. It's not like they're like, oh yeah, we passed all these people running. There was this person. No, there was just this one woman who meets the description of Amy who was out running. And then they mentioned this white van that was weirdly parked out there. That to me is cause for concern.
So the Skinners were sort of relieved at this point. They figured they'd walk up to the car and immediately find Amy inside. But when they did, she wasn't there. And the car had been left unlocked. The keys were sitting on the seat next to her sunglasses and under her to-do list. Her green Eagle Creek wallet was missing. There was no sign of struggle near or in the car. There were puddles below the driver's door and behind the car from recent rainfall, but there were no footprints or tire tracks. The Skinners figured that Amy had parked her car there and then set out on her run, which is likely the case, and she probably left the car on her own accord. They thought she probably fell when she was running and broke her ankle or her leg or something and just needed help. So they were still very concerned, of course, but they truly believed that they would find her nearby quickly. But they kept walking around and shouting her name over and over, and they got no response.
I think a couple things here that I want to dissect. So it wasn't like she was running through like some trails, through a bunch of trees and things like that. This is like a drivable road. So she's running on the road. So you would think that if everything happened the way that we think initially, she's just out running and she fell or hurt herself, that it'd be very easy to locate her on that road. And potentially someone would have already found her prior to them going out and searching. I mean, these hours and hours have gone by this point. So you would think there would have been at least somebody who'd been driving along that would have found her had she hurt herself and gotten her, to safety or to, medical help, something like that. But it's very, very weird that her car is found unlocked, keys sitting on the seat next to her sunglasses, and her wallet is missing, which some would say that runners often leave keys behind their car. They don't want to carry it. I mean, it's kind of heavy and annoying to carry around. Although I do find it a little odd that she didn't bring her sunglasses with her, because as a runner, you probably take your sunglasses with you if you're going to go running. But maybe the sun was already down, so maybe she left those in the car. But the wallet is a little interesting. So either she took that with her, or somebody came and took it out of her vehicle potentially. And then if you look at her to-do list, she has most of everything that we kind of went over crossed off, other than flyers for race, get more boxes, and mow lawn. So that was also on her to-do list for that day, which indicates she was full well planning on mapping out the race and doing other things afterwards.
Right.
So very, very weird.
When it comes to fashion, I have always struggled. I struggle to keep up with the trends. I never know what colors look good on me. And I just overall hate the experience of shopping for new clothes, especially in person. I am much more of an online person. I don't like to actually have to go into fitting rooms and try on a bunch of stuff and deal with them all. I hate it all. And that's why Stitch Fix has been a staple service in my life for about 4 or 5 years now. And I cannot say enough good things about it. I get a fix every 3 weeks. I pay for it myself. I choose my own frequency, and I just love it. I have gotten so many amazing pieces over the years, and they have really helped making shopping so much easier for me. And over time, your fixes just get better and better because each time you give them feedback on what you don't like and what you do like, and they just really learn your style. All you have to do is answer a few questions about where you typically like to shop, what you like to wear, and your price range. And with your choices in mind and a wide range of sizes available, they'll find your perfect fit. And they've got you covered with over 1,000 brands and styles. And if you don't like the dressing room, you can try on your pieces at home before you buy and just keep what you love and send the rest back. It couldn't be easier. Plus, returns, shipping, exchanges are always free. And there's no subscription required. You simply order a refresh as needed or set it and forget it with regular seasonal fixes. You're in complete control. Right now, Stitch Fix is offering our listeners $20 off their first fix at stitchfix.com/milehigher. That's stitchfix.com/milehigher for $20 off today. stitchfix.com/milehigher.
So Steve, the Skinners, and about a dozen other of his friends started searching that next morning for Amy. And by the end of the day, a volunteer search team of around 100 people assembled to scour the area for her. They used ATVs, dogs, and dirt bikes to try and locate her. The team searched the next day, and by the third day, the search area was expanded to a 30-mile radius. But more days went by, and they still didn't find any sign of Amy. The first lead investigator on Amy's case was a new detective named Dave King. And unfortunately, the investigation was botched pretty quickly. For one, investigators let the Skinners drive Amy's car home, which potentially destroyed or contaminated evidence. Now, a key piece of the potential crime scene had been messed with. A lot of the stuff was lost in those first 3 days. Police found a footprint that looked like it came from Amy's sneaker, which was found on Loop Road. But before police could try and match it, the footprint was destroyed, which is all very unhelpful. I can't believe they didn't at least do a forensic search of the car, because it's clear as like inexperience because you roll up on the
Right.
car like, oh, it doesn't look like anything happened here, but that doesn't mean that there's not somebody's DNA there or forensics that you could do to rule that out before just like, all right, just take it, take it
Yeah.
home. Like that happens a lot, unfortunately.
And Dave King himself didn't even show up in Lander until a week later. He had been off in the mountains on a horse packing trip, and Dave had recently been promoted from jailer to detective, and he didn't know the first thing about how to lead a search.
Which I was just going to say, going from jailer to detective.
I know.
That's usually not a promotion that happens in most departments. I'd say probably because this is a small department.
True.
It's not uncommon for this type of, but that's like a huge jump in skill, right? To go from just dealing with processing inmates at the jail or whatever to now being a full-blown investigator of a missing person. Like that's a big jump.
So the volunteer leading the search for Amy was a man named John Gukin, who had a PhD and is a search and rescue expert. He was the one that helped coordinate the mountain search for Amy. And when Dave King got back, he quickly turned to John for help. He literally asked him, well, what can I do? So this town, like we mentioned earlier, was filled with very outdoorsy people who really knew the area well. And so the volunteer search team was made up of a lot of very fit, experienced search and rescue people. And they were searching the mountain for a week. If she was up there, they would have found her, but they didn't. 5 days after the search started, the investigation turned from a missing persons investigation to a criminal investigation, and police blocked off Loop Road to try and find witnesses and collect tips.
I was just going to say too, John Gukin, he runs a basically school. It's called the National Outdoor Leadership School up in Lander, Wyoming. And that's like what they specialize in is wilderness education. They do all sorts of wilderness medicine courses. They have stuff on all sorts of wilderness expeditions they lead. I mean, that's like what they do for a living. So these guys, if there's anybody that's going to be able to find Amy out there and know where to look, how to look, it's these guys, which is, and being in a place where people are constantly outdoors doing recreational activities, people get lost a lot out there in the wilderness. I mean, it's very easy to get turned around and, or get hurt or something like that. So this isn't like foreign to them at all. Like they know how to handle these situations, obviously better than the police did, which is always concerning. But the volunteers were very, very well versed in search and rescue. So if you consume a lot of true crime content, you probably already know that when someone goes missing or is murdered, the first person that police usually look at is the person's spouse or significant other. And in Amy's case, this was no different. On August 5th, a week and a half after Amy went missing, Steve went in for an interview, and investigators started to grill him on his whereabouts on the 25th. And that's when an FBI agent came in and flung a stack of papers at Steve, and he said, "We know you were responsible for your wife's disappearance. Here's the evidence to prove it." We actually have a clip of Steve, the detective, and Steve's lawyer talking about this interview. Let's play that.
I was pretty blown away, and I turned to Dave. I was like, Dave, what's going on here, man? This is not cool.
He was floored, basically. He slumped down in the chair.
The guy says, "Look, if you take a polygraph test, we'll get this cleared up right now." And I was like, wait a minute. If you guys are accusing me of something I didn't do, I'm going to want to talk to legal counsel here.
I wouldn't let any client take a lie detector test. They're completely inaccurate. They come in about 1/3 of the time as a false positive. And it would be a terrible injustice to Steve if he fell within that 1/3 false positive and it was used wrongly against him.
So when this all happened, too, for some more context, Steve initially did say he would take the polygraph test the next day. But then obviously he talked to his lawyer and his lawyer's like, absolutely not. So he didn't end up taking it. So obviously you can take that for what it is. Some people are like, oh, well, that's odd. Why wouldn't you just take the polygraph, clear your name and, move on with things? But obviously there's way more reasons not to take it, because they're extremely unreliable. It gives the police tunnel vision. If you do fail the polygraph, they're just going to go all in on trying to prove that you did it because based on this polygraph.
It could definitely sway them in your direction. I mean, can it really be used against you to convict you? Not necessarily, not really, because not admissible in court. Now, as for hard evidence against Steve, there really wasn't anything. There was some circumstantial evidence that convinced some, but not others. One woman reported that the day Amy went missing, she had seen a truck driving fast in the area where Amy's car was found, and that there was a blonde woman in the passenger seat. The camper found the same truck parked at the search site the next day, and the description of the truck that she gave matched Steve's truck. However, the woman couldn't positively identify the driver as Steve. A youth camp minister reported seeing a truck matching the description of Steve's truck on the 24th, and it was parked by itself in the spot where Amy's car was found. It's unclear whether or not this is the same witness, so a bit confusing here.
I was just going to quickly say that it's also possible, obviously eyewitness testimony is very unreliable, so you can't really derive much from it. And also the fact this is Wyoming and everybody pretty much drives a truck in Wyoming, so it'd be very easy to confuse one truck for, somebody else's truck. I mean, I'm sure there's a lot of trucks that look the same or the same make and model up there. So just want to put that out there.
Steve had told police that he had called the hospital on the 24th, but police say they can't find any such call in the phone logs. However, they did find an important call that potentially exonerates Steve.
At 4:43 p.m. that afternoon, he called a friend around the same time the camper claimed to see his truck on Loop Road. This spot was a 45-minute drive from the Bechtels' house in Climbers Row. Also, Steve said he had an alibi for that day. He was again out scouting a climbing spot with Sam Leitner, and Sam verified to police that Steve had been with him that day. But police seemed to be skeptical of Sam backing up Steve's story. The two had told police that they had bought a hammer for climbing in Du Bois that day, but they couldn't produce a receipt for it. Sam had a record of a gas purchase in Du Bois, but they couldn't place Steve there. Again, it seemed like they were really zeroing in on Steve, but people questioned whether or not it was even possible that Steve could have committed the crime. Because again, Amy was out in the Shoshone National Forest having a run, and they were up in Du Bois. So that's, some distance between those two places. So would they have even had the opportunity to get down there and commit the crime?
Plus, Sam even said that he had been getting along better with Amy than Steve on the Australia trip. He actually hadn't been getting along well with Steve at all. So Sam brought up the point that why would he cover for someone that he was on bad terms with, who was accused of murdering his friend? He wouldn't have lied for Steve. It just didn't make any sense. But again, police were really trying to zero in on Steve. They were able to secure a search warrant for 9 Lucky Lane, which was executed the day after the FBI interview. And the search was to find samples like hair or fingernail clippings to potentially ID Amy's body. But it was also to collect clues. But they did find both Amy and Steve's journals. And when they examined Steve's journals, they did not like what they found. And they're pretty weird. We actually don't have the full journal entries, but from what's been reported, they are strange. Many of the entries have themes of power, control, and even death. One source said that one journal contained an undated poem about murdering a person and then hiding the remains. And according to some sources, many entries showed how he really felt about women, and they were concerning. There were entries with poetry or lyrics that had violent overtones. They described controlling women, and some sources report that this included controlling Amy specifically.
But Steve told investigators that some of the journal entries were from high school. He said they were just lyrics he wrote for his high school band. He said that other entries were stories he submitted to a short story contest back in the day. Todd Skinner, Steve's neighbor, was contacted by the FBI 10 days after the search at Lucky Lane, and the agent told him, quote, "We're going to show you a side of Steve Bechtel you've never seen before. After this, you're going to look at him in a completely different light." But when Todd read the entries, he said they were innocuous and taken out of context. Some of them were Steve's thoughts on getting strength and power, or the relationship between climbing and power. One of the quotes said, "Power is the ultimate aphrodisiac." There was another entry about death, which was written the day after Steve's cousin was killed in a railroad accident. Todd read the entries and told the agents to show him the bad stuff, but according to Todd, that was the FBI's bad stuff.
So like we said, these entries have not been released, and that's due to the continuing investigation. So we haven't been able to see the full contents, but the family was able to read some of the entries themselves, and they were absolutely shocked. Steve insisted that he and Amy had a good relationship, but Nels, Amy's brother, had noticed some things that were off with them, and he had noticed these things in the recent past. Many of Amy's family members say that Steve seemed to be controlling, and it wasn't like Amy to just be subservient to someone that she was with, like Steve. So he told the police about his suspicions. And one night in particular really stood out to Nels. Amy and Steve came to his house for dinner, and Nell's wife, Teresa, noticed that Amy had bruises on her. And when Teresa tried asking about them, she tried to laugh it off. She sort of made a joke saying, "Oh, Steve can get a little rough sometimes."
But Amy wouldn't look her or Nels in the eye. He knew that this was not a normal reaction at all, especially for Amy. And when she made the joke, Steve came over and put his hands on her shoulders. The whole thing was just really off. And according to Nels, Steve refused to come to Nels and his wife's wedding because a possible former boyfriend of Amy's would likely be there. Which, as a side note, Amy did go to the wedding, thankfully, and Nels said that he was so close with his sisters when it came time to decide who would be the best man, he chose all three of them. Other members of the family had noticed controlling behavior on Steve's part. When they went out to eat, Amy would look at Steve as if she were asking him what she should order. It seemed like he told her where to go and when, and she obeyed. And this just wasn't like Amy growing up.
So after Amy's disappearance, the 10K in Shoshone was renamed in honor of her. It became the Amy Bechtel Hill Climb. It was held on September 28th. And about 150 people gathered to run it, all wearing shirts with Amy's face and the tip line number. A climbing fundraiser was also held the day before. Steve, with the help of Todd Skinner and Amy Weisler, ran a makeshift search headquarters out of Climbers Row for months, and Nels and the rest of his family also operated their own search headquarters, but they worked separately from Steve. And 80 days after Amy went missing, Steve talked to a reporter with Runner's World, and he acknowledged that the odds of finding Amy alive at this point were thin. But he said he still held out hope, and he thought that until he knew for certain that she was gone, he would assume that she'd come home. He often took a solitary walk down Loop Road and said that he would think of her. Now, Amy's family has been very frustrated with Steve. They feel like he's really kind of stonewalled the investigation, and they're very displeased that he didn't take a polygraph. Amy's sisters ended up going on the Geraldo Rivera show on February 3rd, 1998, and Geraldo implored Steve to be more cooperative with the authorities.
If you have an upcoming summer trip abroad, my go-to travel hack is Babbel. Whether you're a seasoned traveler or embarking on your first adventure, communication is key to fully experiencing a new culture. That's where Babbel comes in. Babbel is the language learning app that's sold more than 10 million subscriptions, so you know it works. Thanks to Babbel's addictively fun and easy bite-sized language lessons, there's time to learn a new language before you reach your destination. That's what's great about Babbel, is it's not this big, daunting thing like some of the other language learning services out there. They really, really make it easy to learn, especially the parts of the new language that you're needing to use when you actually get to that country. They're going to help you be able to be speaking and having conversations in no time. With Babbel, you only need 10 minutes to complete a lesson, so you can start having real-life conversations in as little as 3 weeks. So even if you're weeks out from going to another country, hop on Babbel and get started on learning the basics of the native language. Babbel's expertly crafted lessons are built around real life. You learn how to have practical conversations about travel, relationships, business, and more. And other language learning apps out there use good old AI for their lessons plans, but Babbel lessons were created by over 150 language experts and voiced by real native speakers and not computers, which is always helpful. Their teaching method has been scientifically proven to be effective, and with Babbel you can choose from 14 different languages. Plus, Babbel's speech recognition technology helps you to improve your pronunciation and accent, and there are so many ways you can learn. It's not just boring lessons. You can do podcasts, games, videos, stories, and even live classes. Best of all, though, it comes with a 20-day money-back guarantee, so you have 20 days to try it out, see if you like it or not. Start your new language learning journey today with Babbel. Right now, get up to 55% off your subscription when you go to babbel.com/milehigher. That's babbel.com/milehigher for up to 55% off your subscription. Babbel, language for life. A year after Amy went missing, a dive team did end up searching Fry Lake, which is the lake at the end of Loop Road. Cadaver dogs from as far as Montana came in to search. One search dog's followed a scent down Burnt Gulch and stopped at a sunken bog. Investigators sifted through all the dirt in the hole thoroughly, but they didn't find anything. Only 2 months after Amy went missing, Dave King resigned from his detective position and handed the case over to Detective Sergeant Roger Reiser. Dave resigned so he could focus on his campaign to be elected as Fremont County Sheriff. But the fact he was campaigning and no longer a detective on the case didn't stop him from appearing on the Geraldo Rivera show with Amy's sisters. Steve's lawyer even accused him of using Amy's case to bolster his campaign. Dave was actually elected as sheriff in 1998, but he wouldn't stay sheriff for very long. He actually resigned on November 3rd, 2000 after he was accused of misconduct. Dave said it was because of health problems, and these health problems actually stemmed from 3 days of cocaine usage back in May of 2000.
And later, he pled guilty to stealing cocaine from a law enforcement storage locker, and this cocaine was meant to train the drug-sniffing dogs. Anyway, the investigation into Amy's disappearance continued, but not much came up. Investigators did find out that Amy had sort of a stalker while she was back in school in Laramie. He was a middle-aged man named Kelly McLeod who spoke to Amy frequently while she waitressed at a coffee shop. But Kelly became obsessive to the point where it made Amy very uncomfortable. And when Kelly and Amy had met in 1995, he was actually a fugitive. He had been on the run since 1991, fleeing sexual assault charges in Kentucky. So obviously, investigators were very interested in talking to Kelly. They located him in 1998, and he was in an Oregon prison awaiting trial for those sexual assault and fugitive charges.
Kelly said the two started off friendly and Amy had gotten Kelly into running. Kelly also told investigators that Amy had heart-to-hearts with him about her and Steve's relationship. And these conversations apparently didn't contain anything investigators didn't already know. Investigators determined Kelly was in Bangor, Maine on the night of the 23rd, and they didn't consider him a suspect in the case. So back in late August of 1997, the FBI actually called up NASA for help with the case. They requested satellite photos from the area Amy disappeared from on the day she went missing. NASA sent the images over, but they didn't show Amy or give clues as to what happened to her. In January of 1998, the FBI tried again to check satellite photos, and this time they were provided by the Russian space station Mir. But they couldn't see anything in these photos either because clouds had been covering the area, unfortunately.
And then in 1999, a suspected gravesite was found in the Wind River Mountains near Lander. Bones were recovered and sent in for testing, but we don't know anything more about this. However, at this point, we can kind of safely assume that the bones didn't belong to Amy, and it was likely animal bones. Also, investigators later said that people reported small dug-up graves, and these had actually been dog burials. And Lander is a town with a pretty low crime rate, but in the year before Amy went missing, there was an increase in break-ins and rapes, and many women in the town started enrolling in self-defense courses. But it's unknown if any of these incidents have any connection to Amy's case. Other people who were in the Loop Road area on the 24th also reported hearing gunfire at a lake 8 miles away.
So when I was doing research for this case, I was trying to find more about this gunfire, and I couldn't really find anything. And I'm assuming at this point they determined it's unrelated, but I do think it makes sense given they're up in the mountains, isolated areas. There's pretty commonly people firing off guns.
Yeah.
And there was no specification on exactly where it was coming from and like what time. So
very easily could have been hunting or...
It's definitely interesting to think about, though. When I think back to the Moab murders and how they were looking for people that had heard gunfire in that area from specific times, and they were able to kind of get some developments in that case from that. So just something to think about.
Worth noting. Yeah.
In June of 2003, a hiker found a watch that looked similar to the one Amy owned in the Papoja River. However, police haven't been able to confirm whether or not it belonged to Amy. Many articles have been written about Amy's disappearance, including in Outside, Runner's World, and People magazine, and these articles led to police getting their first tip in months. A woman from Sarasota, Florida, called police and told them she was sure she had seen Amy. She said she looked disheveled, homeless, and was walking through the streets. Amy's family had a burst of hope as they thought maybe Amy had been kidnapped and taken there, and she was actually alive. Investigators from Wyoming actually flew out to investigate this tip. They were able to locate and identify the woman, but sadly, she wasn't Amy.
That's the worst. I hate when families have to go through that and get that hope and think maybe this is it. Maybe they're still alive. And then they're just crushed. It's got to be so draining. So many people put out the theory that Amy could have been killed by the so-called Great Basin Killer. The Great Basin murders are a loosely grouped string of murders that occurred 1983 to 1997. Many of the murders are believed to be the work of one person, a serial killer. The name, of course, comes from the Great Basin region of the United States, and most of the victims' remains were found in Wyoming, Idaho, Nevada, and Utah near the interstate highways that pass through these states. This killer has not been conclusively identified, but many people do believe that he is convicted murderer Dale Wayne Eaton. Dale was a divorced father and drifter. He lived in the middle of nowhere, 75 miles from Casper, in between there and Riverton. 2 months after Amy went missing, Dale tried to kidnap the Breeden family. Shannon and Scott Breeden were traveling with their 5-month-old baby, Cody, down Interstate 80. While they drove through Patrick Draw, an area 3 hours from Lander, they started having car troubles.
So they pulled over to the side of the highway. A disheveled-looking 51-year-old man in a green van pulled over and offered to help. He told the family to get in his van, and he asked Shannon to drive. She agreed, but unfortunately for them, that man was no good Samaritan. He was in fact Dale Wayne Eaton. When Dale got into the passenger seat, he grabbed a rifle from the back seat and pointed it at the family, and he ordered Shannon to drive south of the highway into the desert. But Shannon thought quick on her feet. She floored it and made a tight circular turn, which this allowed Scott to jump out of the car with her baby, and Shannon jumped out the other side. Dale grabbed Shannon, and he was about to stab her with a knife when Scott grabbed Dale's arm, snatched his rifle, and whacked him over the head with the rifle butt. A struggle followed, and the Breeden stabbed Dale, beat him with his own rifle, and then hopped in the van and sped off, making their escape and leaving Dale lying in the dirt.
That is badass.
Wow. That is insane. Amazing courage and bravery to do that. And
quick thinking. Too.
Yeah.
Dale was arrested for attempted kidnapping, and he accepted a plea deal, which meant he was sentenced to just 99 days in jail. From there, due to prison overcrowding, he was paroled to a halfway house with a strict probation and curfew. He was allowed to use his van to go to work. And then later in June of 1998, Dale failed to show up to work. Police arrested him at gunpoint and found a shotgun in his truck, so he was imprisoned on federal weapons charges. Authorities were able to establish that Dale had been seen in Lander around the time that Amy went missing. Dale's brother Richard said that he knew Dale had been camping in the Burnt Gulch area around the time of Amy's disappearance. In fact, the area where Amy was making her upcoming 10K was actually the Eaton brothers' favorite elk hunting and trout fishing spot. And after he heard about his brother's attempted kidnapping charges, he began to suspect that he did something to Amy Bechtel. And he called police with his tip in July of 1998. But after Richard called the police with this info and his suspicions, the detective on the case at the time, Detective Reiser, immediately dismissed it. Instead, he believed Dale's niece, who told him that Dale was visiting her in Greeley, Colorado at the time of Amy's disappearance.
At the time, there was a $100,000 reward for anyone who had information that could resolve the case. So the investigators were suspicious of Richard's motives, and they thought he could have just been trying to get the money. At the time, they didn't know that Dale was connected to a decade-old unsolved homicide. In March of 1988, a young 18-year-old woman named Lisa Marie Kimmel was on her way from Denver to visit a friend in Billings, Montana. She planned to stop in Cody, Wyoming to see her boyfriend, but she never made it. On March 25th, 1988, en route to Cody, Lisa disappeared. A week later, her body was found in the North Platte River near Casper, and her case was named after her custom Lil Miss license plate. Lisa's murder went unsolved for over a decade until DNA evidence linked Dale to her murder in 2002. Dale was already in jail on felony firearms charges when the murder was conclusively linked to him. He was also awaiting trial for manslaughter after he killed his cellmate via a vertebral artery punch. Police found Lisa's car buried in Dale's backyard. He had taken it as a sick trophy and drained his septic tank into it.
Back in 1988, Dale had kidnapped Lisa from a remote rest stop, and for several days, he held her captive in a filthy converted school bus, and he repeatedly raped her before brutally killing her and dumping her body. In March of 2004, Dale was found guilty of this murder, and he was sentenced to death by lethal injection. But he was granted a stay of execution in December of 2009 after his lawyers argued that he had been mentally incompetent to stand trial. Around 2010, Detective Sergeant John Zerga was assigned to the case after the previous detective retired. Zerga really tried to restart the investigation and clean up the mess that the first detective had made of it, but it was difficult given the amount of time that had passed. Here's Zerga talking a little bit more about the case.
From such a small community where we don't have a lot of criminal activity, especially in that time, to just go up in the mountains for a run and then just disappear and basically just disappear without any traces of evidence for the officers to follow up on. We still believe there's that person out there, that one person that has that type of information. We need that tip or that lead, and we did develop some new stuff that me and the FBI agent, myself and the FBI agent are looking into.
He was able to have the Lucky Lane house searched around 2010. He and the FBI came in, did luminol testing, and brought in cadaver dogs, but unfortunately they didn't find anything. He also got a tip that Steve had buried Amy under the driveway of their new home before the concrete set, but their search of the driveway also turned up nothing. Investigators also checked out a lead that drunk drivers had hit Amy and buried her body in a shallow grave somewhere on the nearby Wind River Reservation.
Detective Zerga actually got permission to search the tribal lands, and he actually found the vehicle involved in the alleged accident. But when the vehicle was processed by forensic investigators, nothing related to Amy's disappearance was found. Over the years, investigators have tried to talk to Dale about the case, but none have been successful. Detective Zerga and a colleague went to talk to Dale's family members in 2012. Richard, his brother, backed up the tip he gave police when Amy first went missing. Detective Zerga and the FBI tried talking to Dale later that year, but he basically refused to talk and told them to go to hell. And in November of 2014, a U.S. district judge overturned his death sentence and commuted it to life in prison. And now that Dale wasn't facing the death penalty, investigators had lost a bargaining chip that could have gotten him to talk. According to a former FBI agent familiar with the Little Miss murder, Dale has a personality consistent with the profile of serial killers. Other FBI agents working on the case said that based on his profile, Dale had likely killed before. Here are some of the potential signs, as Dale had a troubled, violent, and unstable childhood. He left Kimmel's body in a popular fishing spot, creating a public spectacle. He took her car as a trophy. He left the Stringfellow Hawk note at her grave. It says, Lisa, there aren't words to say how much you're missed. The pain never leaves. It's so hard without you. You'll always be alive in me. Your death is my painful loss, but heaven's sweet gain. Love always, Stringfellow Hawk. I think the FBI are obviously correct in saying that he's exhibiting a lot of different signs that are consistent with other serial killers. I mean, obviously, taking her car as a trophy and just that note is very, very bizarre as well. I don't think it's out of the realm of possibility that Dale has killed numerous individuals. Again, we don't have proof of that, so It's hard to say without him divulging more information or more evidence being found. I do think it is possible he was up in this area, although I just feel like we would have found something. Without getting Dale to talk more, though, about where he was during this time period, I think it's very difficult to even connect him to this at all. I mean, obviously, victim-wise, she would be probably the type of individual he was looking for,
right?
But there's not enough information or evidence to point that he did this numerous times. Because, like, yeah, he does have the signs of a serial killer, but that doesn't necessarily mean he is a serial killer. Like, maybe this was the first time that he did this. He seemed very, very proud of it. So I don't know. It's hard to say.
It's possible, of course.
It's possible. Like, and it could be another killer. I mean, there's definitely more opportunities for other serial killers to be out there that maybe haven't been caught or just have never talked about this particular incident. But the more and more I kind of learn about the Dale and what he was doing, I don't know if I necessarily think he was connected to this anyway. Is it possible? Yes, but
so I
think there's more evidence pointing a different direction than to Dale potentially being the one.
Feel that he was the Great Basin Killer then?
Not necessarily. I mean, just based on the way that he, with the Little Miss murder and the way that he conducted that, it seems like he was kind of sloppy and
I agree.
And kind of like just had focused on this one individual. Because, I mean, if you look at other serial killers out there, the ones that are able to get away with it for a long, long time are much, much, I guess, smarter about the way they go about disposing of their victims and hiding the crimes.
Yeah.
They're not so like brazen and burying a car and stuff. Like that's strange. Like that's pretty bold to do something like that.
Especially with that many. I mean, if all of those killings really are connected to one person and that person is the Great Basin Killer, it seems like they likely haven't been caught.
Right. Well, it kind of reminds me of like the smiley face killers, because there's a possibility that the smiley face killer isn't one killer. There could be multiple individuals, but they're, they're kind of grouping. They're looking at the patterns and locations and timing and similarities between the different crimes. And that's how they're kind of coming up with, well, it could be one killer that's moving, that's, killing in this area, and all the victims are similar. So therefore it is possible it's one, but it's also possible there's more than one operating.
Do people really believe smiley face could be one person? I've never heard that.
I mean, I think the general consensus is that it's multiple.
Has to be, right?
Multiple individuals.
A group.
And that's the thing too, is like the more, I think a lot of us, just based on what we learn from or what we hear about, a lot of us, it depends on how much you know about serial killers too, but there's a lot of serial killers that operate in groups as well, like that are either a cult or a gang or something like that. And I think sometimes that gets overlooked, and we like to just point to one individual because that's just kind of that's what the FBI looks at most of the time, is these singular individuals who go and kill multiple people. I mean, think of Ted Bundy and Jeffrey Dahmer and some of the big names out there, the Green River Killer and stuff like that. But I think people overlook groups of individuals that abduct people and kill people, that there's actually gangs and sometimes satanic cults and things like that who are operating, especially in these remote areas. There's a lot of strange individuals that live out there in the middle of nowhere. And I think oftentimes the FBI go to like what they investigate most, and that's kind of these singular killers, as opposed to so many cases that I've covered on Lights Out that have been these groups of individuals that go out and abduct individuals and kill people. The FBI often has no idea about them, which is interesting to me. And it's often, the local authorities end up solving it, or they don't solve it at all. So I think it's also possible that there's an unknown group of individuals out there in this area. I mean, it's a huge, vast wilderness out there. I mean, there's tons of people that could just be living. There's off-grid communities out there. There's all sorts of other scenarios that could have played out here, other than just it was the Great Basin Killer, and they don't even know if it was Dale or not for sure. So I think it's interesting to consider, and it's certainly possible that the Great Basin Killer was responsible for Amy. But I just feel like when you're dealing with singular individuals, it's harder to cover that up. And just based on Dale's background, I don't know that he would have been just making people disappear without a trace, and we would have found
he
nothing.
may not be the Great Basin
right,
Killer.
and that's
seems unlikely in my opinion.
So, yeah, I think serial killer is definitely an option, but I just don't necessarily think it was Dale, or Dale is the Great Basin Killer either. But I see why they're looking at him. I mean, they have to.
I think they should have looked at him more, really ruled it out.
Well, they can't get him to talk. I mean, he's already.
But investigate more if he was really in Greeley at that time.
Yeah. I mean, it gets difficult when you have individuals crossing multiple state lines and stuff. It gets, it's harder to investigate that. So.
Going back to Steve here, Detective Zerga hasn't ruled out that Steve is a suspect officially, but it seems like he doesn't think Steve did something to Amy. Steve was in excellent physical shape, but to Zerga, the question is, why wait until Amy was on a run? It seemed to make more sense that he would do it at home. Zerga really would like to rule Steve out, but he says he can't until Steve sits down with him and takes that polygraph. The polygraph would even consist of questions Steve and presumably his lawyer would know beforehand. But as far as we know, Steve hasn't taken that polygraph. And of course, Zerga does acknowledge that probably no lawyer in the world would advise that Steve take it. So it seems like they're currently at a stalemate. Steve is listed as a person of interest in the case, but not a suspect. And interestingly enough, Even Steve has doubts about the Dale Wayne Eaton theory. In a 2016 email to Runner's World, Steve wrote, "As much as Eaton makes an attractive suspect, I don't think we're ever going to learn anything from him. I think trying to point the finger at him just provides a convenient answer in a situation where there are no answers. With every year passing, the likelihood of finding useful information decreases."
Steve had Amy declared legally dead in absentia in 2004. So this was 7 years after she went missing, which is a legal minimum to have someone declared dead in absentia. He also remarried, and he and his second wife have 2 kids together, and he still lives in Lander today. Amy's family is still very upset that Steve hasn't taken a polygraph. According to Amy's mom, Joanne, he never agreed to share any information with law enforcement or our family. If he was a loving husband, he would do anything he could do to help. Joanne and her family haven't spoken to Steve since the 10K, and he had no intention of speaking with police more anytime soon. Joanne just wishes after all these years that the case could be solved, and nobody in the family has accepted Amy's disappearance, but they try to learn to live with it.
Sadly, in 2001, Amy's father, Dwayne, passed away, and that means he never found out what happened to his daughter, which is just terrible.
That's heartbreaking, man.
So far, besides the car, any other clues as to what happened to Amy haven't turned up. I mean, no blood, no body, no clothes, nothing that she was wearing that day, nothing like that. $100,000 of reward money was eventually converted into scholarship funds. Amy is still classified as an endangered missing person. Her case is still unsolved and leads have dried up, so the case has gone cold at this point. If you have any information, please contact Crime Stoppers at 1-800-442-8477 or the Fremont County Sheriff at 307-332-5611. So let's discuss some potential theories here. Obviously, the police believe that Amy could have been attacked by a mountain lion or a bear while she was on her run. Then the animal dragged her body back to a cave and her remains haven't been found. And that is possible.
But unlikely based on prior incidents of people being attacked by wild animals.
Mm-hmm.
I actually just did an episode on wild animal attacks. And
yeah.
I mean, when a wild animal attacks you, a bear or a mountain lion, which would have been the most common animal she would have been attacked by, there would be evidence of that. There would be blood for sure. They don't cleanly like bite you and drag you away. And most of the times, depending, they're going to do the damage where they find you and then maybe eventually take pieces with them. But it's very unlikely that it was an animal that attacked her, in my opinion.
I don't know much about wild animal attacks. Has there ever been, well, I guess you don't know everything about it, but I wonder if there's ever been a situation where someone goes into shock and like passes out and there's no need for the animal to viciously attack.
That's not how animals eat though. Bears,
they don't like bring you
bears
back.
Bears destroy you.
Right.
Scene. They destroy you on site. Yeah. They rip you apart.
So why would
a mountain lion's
going to
grab you by the neck, most likely, or the arm, or some. So
something would be left
there
behind.
Would be, yes.
Or like drag marks even, or just something.
It sounded like it had recently rained too. So they would have found, I mean, they searched immediately, like within 24 hours, they would have found some evidence because she didn't go into the woods as far as we know.
Right.
She was on Loop Road. So there would be blood on Loop Road somewhere and clear signs of where an animal would have dragged her off. And likely there would have been part of her still there. It's not like the animal goes and cleans it all up and takes it all with them. It takes what it wants and leaves the rest. I mean, it was so soon after that they were out there, they would have 100% found her.
So what do you think about the theory that someone hit her with their car, potentially a drunk driver, and then got rid of her body?
I still think even in that scenario, well, first of all, it's in the afternoon.
People drink and
drive, I guess, in the afternoon. It's still possible.
And I mean, they may not have been drunk. They may have just accidentally hit her, didn't see her, and
it's certainly possible. I just think that there would still be more evidence to suggest that there would have been somebody would have saw something. And I mean, you got to think about the person who would do something like that. Would they be capable of pulling that off without any?
Yeah, because you have to be quick.
If you're hitting somebody to the point too where they're dead on impact, like would somebody hit somebody and then on accident, and if they didn't kill that person, would they then pick them up and take them off, like kidnap them essentially. And I think that's a highly unlikely scenario. If they did kill them, even then, there would have been something. There would have been skid marks from a vehicle hitting it. There would have been some evidence of like the car going off the road or
Most
footprints
likely,
of
yeah.
other people walking around. I mean, to me, this was as clean of an abduction as you could possibly pull off. Like
If that
she
were the
just,
case,
yeah,
yeah.
she just vanished off of the road. And I don't think that's a scenario. I think it's one of two things. I think clearly she was a victim of foul play. I think we can pretty confidently say she was a victim of foul play. It's not like she went for a run and decided to leave her whole life behind.
Well,
and
I don't
just
think we
disappear.
can clearly say that. What if she got in some sort of accident and she couldn't call for help and was
She would have
just
turned
never
up somewhere.
found?
Where would she have gone?
I know she was just on Loop Road.
Where would she have? And somebody would have
Could
seen
an animal
her.
have taken her away after she
There would be
had
evidence.
died?
They would have found it. Dogs would have sniffed the blood. There had been.
That's true.
There, they
Especially
had
after the
cadaver
rain.
dogs. I mean, they would have found. There's been nothing found. I am very interested in the van that's parked. That is very sketch to me. And one thing that is kind of a consistent trend among serial killers is they use vans. Like it seems like this cliche from movies, but it's a legit thing. Like a lot of serial killers that I've looked into have used vans to abduct victims because, you know, those vans, they can't see in the back.
No
Most of those
windows,
utility
yeah.
vans, they have no windows. It's easy to bound somebody and kidnap them really easily, put them in the back and you're off. And the fact that people saw a white van just hanging out up there in that area when she went missing is very, very suspicious. Because, I mean, think about it. The perfect place for a predator to abduct somebody is in this place. To me, this is somebody local to the area. This is somebody who knows this area very well, knows where to go, where nobody will see them, knows the right time of day, potentially somebody who was even stalking her. We don't know for sure. Or it was just a crime of opportunity. The person was just up there knowing that people are going to come running up this road and was just waiting for the right moment for a woman to be running by herself. I mean, think about this too. There was just that case in Arizona, I believe, where that woman was running and a guy came up out of nowhere and killed her on the trail.
Yeah.
And this happened like within the last couple weeks.
Oh, it's horrific.
It's horrific. And this happens.
Someone look that up. I forget her name. That happened really recently.
But I mean, this happens all.
She was an
all the time.
esthetician. That might help.
So, yeah, Arizona woman. I mean, you'll find it really easily. But this happens all the time.
I mean, yeah, I think about like in college, you know, where I went to school in the mountains here, like people are going hiking a lot, young women going hiking a lot. And a lot of times you want to do it alone. You know, your friends' schedules don't match up. And we heard many stories about people up in like the state park, El Dorado Canyon.
Yeah.
There was a woman that was assaulted while she was hiking alone. Like there was many stories where, you know,
yeah,
woman
well, that's
hiking
what I'm
alone,
saying.
yeah, crime of opportunity.
And what better place than going to a place where you know there's not going to be a lot of people around.
Oh, that's a good point.
And you can easily hide. You can easily, nobody's there to save you up there. I mean, it's not like there's rangers roaming the trails all the time. It's not like there's not service a lot of the times up there. So it's hard. I mean, and this was before cell phones was a thing. So this is like the perfect hunting grounds for a predator who is looking for their victim. And I think that's exactly what happened. Somebody was, if it wasn't Steve, it was somebody else who was using this area to hunt for victims. And Amy may have just been in the wrong place at the wrong time when they took advantage of the fact she was running alone.
That's why it's just so important to hike and run, you know.
For male or female. I mean, you shouldn't, I mean, it's
you shouldn't be alone. You really shouldn't.
Yeah, an animal can attack you. And,
yeah, definitely men too. I mean, you could get in an accident, animal accident.
Well, I covered the guy that was running up in, I believe it was in the Boulder area. He was running on the trail. He was trail running in a mountain lion, jumped out and jumped on him. He ended up killing the mountain lion. It's hard
because I know that so many outdoorsy people seek that peace.
Yeah,
and
you want to go out there alone
because
you're like, but
I was actually just hiking over the weekend by myself, and
Julia.
I know.
Julia.
Well, you know, I think people are still going to do it. There's always going to be people that do it. And I would have preferred to go with other people, but biggest thing is one, charged phone, on your person, water, food, all that. And especially if you're a woman, but really anyone, mace.
Yeah, at least
some
bring
sort of
something.
safety tools, especially, because mace.
Bear spray.
You might need it if there are, mountain lions, bears on the trail, but it'll make you feel safer to begin with. And you can just really, enjoy your hike more. But it's safer.
So that woman we mentioned who was murdered in Arizona recently is named Lauren Heike. She's only 29 years old. This happened April 29th near a hiking trail where she would often walk. And this was only a half mile from her home. So
a recently released felon stabbed her to death on the hiking trail. And that's the thing though, too, is like when you're out hiking, oftentimes this is also another tip. Don't wear earbuds. Don't
Which
don't
sucks,
play music.
Obviously you want to enjoy the music, enjoy the nature.
You need to be able to hear
alert.
your surroundings, not just for
especially
human
noise
predators,
canceling.
but animal predators as well.
That's
yeah,
what it's
definitely
nice
not noise canceling.
There's some brands out there that have the ability to
switch.
But
even then you're not gonna be able to hear somebody creeping up on you.
That's true. They're gonna
I just am like it sucks that this is the world that we're in, that you can't feel safe going out into nature where you're supposed to be able to seek
out
solitude
into literally
peace.
anywhere.
Yeah,
the grocery store, the mall, your school.
It's the truth.
It's a fucked up world. You really got to be vigilant at all times, everywhere you are.
I wouldn't be surprised if the individual that did this to Amy, that made her disappear, is somebody local to Lander, Wyoming. That's just somebody that's kind of living in plain sight. You see that a lot of the times too. It's like the guy down at the fitness center she worked at for all. I mean, it could have been somebody who they knew exactly where she'd be that day. She had talked to them prior into the day. If I were investigators, I would be investigating every single person that she came into contact, especially males that she came into contact at her work in that day, and just look into every single one of them, because it could be literally somebody who's just hiding in plain sight.
So obviously we've gone over the theory already in detail, our thoughts on the Great Basin Killer and Dale Wayne Eaton. So I won't go over that again, but let's go back to Steve once more.
I think there's a lot of very concerning things, and I understand the families. Seems to me that they think that Steve is somehow involved.
Yeah, I would say that. They definitely allude to that.
They're very suspicious of him. They don't talk to him anymore. I think the writings are very concerning for sure.
Especially if we could actually see them, I think that would really put it into perspective to read the words ourselves and know what he was saying. Especially that he talks about murdering someone and hiding their remains. I think that is extremely alarming.
I mean, you see that in other killers cases out there as well, where they're writing about doing this. And especially it's concerning if he was writing about this in high school, and this is kind of always something that maybe he was fantasizing about potentially, and he finally had the opportunity. Because here's the thing too, is like, what better person to make someone disappear than an experienced climber who knows where to stash a body, go find a crevice in a rock somewhere where nobody's going to ever look, and you could easily dump remains in there and no one would ever find it. I mean,
and then you go back to the woman who thought that she saw Steve's truck with her in the passenger seat.
Although I mean, his alibi though is what I go back to, is
pretty
like,
hard.
Why would somebody cover for him? Which that seems,
he was closer with Amy, so that just really doesn't add up. It seems like he really has kind of a rock solid alibi, and he could have been an abusive, shitty guy,
right? And just by
still
coincidence, it doesn't mean he made her disappear,
right?
I mean, I think if he was truly involved too, I don't know that he would have stayed in Lander, and he's still very
it would almost make it worse.
True, if he left, that's true. But I don't know. I mean, oftentimes we see people leave the area.
I wonder if there's more that the family hasn't said, because they do seem to really lean in Steve's direction. And why is that? If there is this solid alibi,
more. There's got to be more there. Because
maybe
what's the motive too? What would be the motive for Steve?
Right, because there was no life insurance money to get.
It wasn't like there'd be a reason for him to do this.
There wasn't any motive.
So it'd be like, why would he just go up there and do kidnap her and then
Yeah.
what would be the point of that? But obviously investigators have said he's a person of interest at this point. He's not a official suspect. There's no evidence, as far as we know, that conclusively connects him to her disappearance at this point.
What about the idea that she disappeared on her own accord?
Another possibility is, what if Steve helped her leave on her own accord? Like Steve's a part of the plan to do that.
Yeah.
But that's
whole theory
weird.
just
And that
does not
doesn't, I mean, they
sit.
had just started a life. They had just gotten a house. So like they were just starting.
Yeah.
I think this was something totally random. Somebody was hunting on that road that day. That van, I can't get that van out of my head. I think whoever is in that van was the one that took her.
I'm stuck. I kind of lean 50-50 Steve's direction and a random person. But it's hard. I mean, I don't really have any certain...
It's just crazy. There's zero evidence. Zero.
No,
nothing.
really,
no sign.
not
She
a lot.
vanished without a trace from Loop Road.
No blood, nothing. Crazy. We definitely want to hear your thoughts, of course. Let us know what theory makes most sense to you, or if there's something that we didn't point out that you think could be a possibility. Let us know in our comments, or you can head over to our Instagram page and give us your feedback there as well. But that is going to be it for us today, guys. We'll be back next week, of course. But until then, keep on taking your mind a mile higher.